Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to that Trippi Show. This week, an election in Ohio that I think everybody needs to be looking at. How should Democrats be dealing with the Hunter Biden verdict? And more good news on the economy this week. How's it being reported? Will it be enough? Or is it more bad news? Sorry. You got good jobs numbers. It's bad for Biden. And we get into the Senate this week. Plus, you asked me to look into my crystal ball again with some fun questions. Alex, where should we get started?
Joe, I think we should go to Ohio. You flagged this one this week. This is something we need to be keeping an eye on. You were sending us election results. Special election in Ohio 6 for Congress. That's Southeast Ohio. Joe, what'd you see here?
It's really interesting because it was a good win for the Republican state senator, Michael Rulli. He won by 9 points, total of 5,000 votes. And, you start looking at that and you say to yourself, well, geez, not good. But this is a massive Republican underperformance. The Democrat is a waiter who waits on, tables at a restaurant, spent $25,000 running for this seat. The Republican is a state senator who spent over $700,000. This is Trump country, my friends. District is 90% white, only 20% college education levels. It is Trump country, and Trump won this district by 29 points in 2020. In 2022, the Republican won the district by 35 points and 90,000 votes.
He's resigned, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. But he resigned to become Youngstown State's president. But okay, whatever. But he's gone. He quits. And the Republican running against a Democrat in this district wins by 9%, not 29, by 5,000 votes, not 90,000 votes. Now, people are saying, yeah, but it was a low turnout. Well, it was a low turnout, but supposedly Trump's and MAGA supporters are like more crazy than anybody to turn out and vote, on election day. Just didn't happen. So I think when you look at it, Sherrod Brown had to wake up and look at those results and look at how he performed in this congressional district, and has to have a big smile on his face and feel pretty good about it. I think we should too. So, when you see poll after poll, at some point, you just have to shake your head because actual election results keep showing Democrats overperforming and Republicans, and particularly MAGA Republicans, underperforming. So at this point, it's just performing, right? I mean, I don't, again.
Like the baseline has not been reset, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's the same result over and over. We saw it all through again, remember, we saw this in 2022, Democrats overperforming, but the big red wave was coming. It didn't happen. And people kept citing the polls, and we kept saying, but wait, look at how people are voting. Didn't matter. Simon Rosenberg, myself, Tom Bonnier, a whole bunch of people were out there repeatedly in 2022, Alex among them, all of us bringing this up repeatedly. And then people said, stop repeating yourselves. So anyway, we're repeating ourselves again. It's the performance at the polls stupid, and actual election results keep showing Democrats overperforming no matter what those really smart, thoughtful polls suggest.
Speaking of actual data, and I know we were talking about this before the show too, any other data you saw that's interesting this week?
Yeah, my favorite one is Carl Quintanilla at CNBC had a really interesting post on Twitter, which I follow, and I actually think people should follow him on Twitter. He's always got some insightful stuff to say. But the populations in each battleground state are actually shifting towards Democrats. Based on new census data, AP has shown that net population growth in Biden versus Trump counties in swing states has radically shifted towards Democrats. Democrats have gained net population in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Georgia, those were just gains, but they have massive gains, more than 100,000 in Pennsylvania and Nevada, and more than 250,000 more Democrats have migrated to Arizona in these districts. And the only state where Republicans have gained net population in Trump counties is North Carolina. So when, we talked a lot last year, and I said this about, how I thought there was a strategy in Florida and Texas in particular. Yeah. Abbott and DeSantis was to basically say, hey, if you hate gays, if you hate all these groups that we're attacking, well, you guys can, if you hate them, come here, move here. And if you're one of those groups we all hate, you better leave our state. Well, it looks like a lot of people are doing exactly that. Unfortunately, I do think it means in-migration into Florida and Texas, that strategy worked. But what it may be doing, and some Californians have moved, obviously, as well. But what may be happening is those people left and went somewhere. And it looks like they're going to places like Wisconsin, Michigan, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona. And only one place seems to have gained sort of more Trump voters in those counties, and that's North Carolina. So when you start looking at, now, have these people register to vote in these new, there's all kinds of things. This work still needs to be done. There's plenty of time to register people before November. But it's all another big plus data point for those of us who are doing the work on where we can go to work and find new people who've moved into those states and register them to vote if they haven't already done so.
Joe, we do have to talk about it. Obviously, Hunter Biden was convicted on some gun charges this week. How does the Hunter Biden verdict affect how Democrats can attack the Trump felonies? And by the way, if you hear the tone in my voice, I think I know where you're going. I can't believe I even have to ask this. Does this even really affect anything?
No, it doesn't affect it. Well, yes, it does. It's not the Hunter Biden conviction verdict. It's the verdicts and the contrast between that one, they were both Donald Trump and Hunter Biden were convicted by citizen juries, and the contrast between how they handled it, what they're saying, and by the way, how the juries are reacting, right? I mean, look at how Joe Biden handled it. He said he wouldn't pardon Hunter. He said he loved and supported his son who's battling addiction. He supported the rule of law and that he would abide by, as this got appealed, et cetera, but whatever the decision of our justice system was, should play out, and he would abide by it. Now, by the way, interestingly enough, let's get into versus Trump. Attacking the jurors and the judge and everyone and anyone claiming the whole thing is rigged. Ultimately, it comes down to integrity, and the contrast is there. But look, you don't have to look at the juries in the Hunter Biden case. Those jurors are out there speaking openly, seemingly unafraid about any retribution or revenge for convicting the president of the United States' son. They're not sitting there trying, talking behind, basically like they're like in a witness protection program or anything. Right. They're out there and talking about how they had a 6-6 thing, and they started talking about it, and they all came to the right conclusion in their minds and found him guilty. You go back the other way. Has anybody heard from a single juror in any of the cases? I mean, any of them against Trump? No. Yeah, and particularly the jury that convicted him of 34 counts, felony counts, nothing. None of them. They're out in darkness somewhere. Why? Well, again, because of those two different reactions I'm talking. One, a family obviously in pain because of the Hunter Biden situation, but respects the rule of law. They're not talking about revenge or anything. They are talking maybe, we can appeal it. As Trump will appeal his. But Trump's the one that was attacking jurors and the judge and everyone involved. And there's a reason that that's an attack on our justice system. And so that's what the American people get to look at. That's the contrast that matters. Someone who's willing to tear down the American justice system, blame it all. And by the way, it's all bullshit. And now it's clear that it's bullshit because that Justice Department that was out to two-tiered justice that Trump claims he was victim to just turned into no, it's not two tiers. It's the same tier. You and the president's son are on the same tier. And guess what? No one's above the law. And yes, Hunter Biden has a right to appeal, as do you, former president and 34-count convicted felon, Donald Trump. But in the end, we either, as a country, decide that one absolutely is doing everything he can, like he's done with so many other institutions, to tear down. He's not a law and order anything. He wants to tear down the justice system. And there's another, and the Biden family is, they're not claiming they're victims, and they are going to probably, Hunter will probably appeal. But in the end, here's the other thing that I can't stand about this whole thing. You see it on cable all the time now. So one, has anybody, like when the president said, hey, I'm not going to pardon Hunter, I won't do it. And, you think about that, because does anybody have any doubt that if Donald Trump becomes president and this stuff's hanging over him, that he would pardon himself? No. Does any of the press ask him if he'll pardon himself if he's convicted? No. When you see that tape, I want to see it. But we asked Biden, and Biden says, no, I won't pardon him. Well, then, wait. He said now the right's coming out. He said he'd pardon him, but maybe he wouldn't pardon him, but maybe he'll commute the sentence. So now, okay, let's just argue that 3 days from now, Biden has to go out and say, no, I won't commute it either. Then it'll be, well, wait a minute, what if he resigns? Let Kamala become president so she can pardon Hunter. There's no way you can satisfy the hypocrisy of these assholes. No freaking, and the press keeps playing it. They're going to keep asking these dumbass questions when the president said he won't pardon his own son. And at the same time, is there any doubt Trump, he's pardoned Steve Bannon. He's pardoned, look at the people he's pardoned and what they were accused of that he's pardoned them for. Not to mention the hang Mike Pence and everything else. It's just unbelievable. That contrast is the one the press and all of us need to make. It is the contrast that will drive the Republicans who said they won't vote for a convicted felon, the undecideds who said they won't vote for a convicted felon, and even the Trump supporters who said the MAGA Trump supporters said they won't vote for a convicted felon. Drive that with a hammer. For once, we have a sledgehammer against this bastard.
Yeah, I was going to say, Joe, you should probably let us know how you really feel.
I'm not finished. You have the YouGov.
I'm loving this, Joe. Lay it on us.
2/3 of Americans approve of the jury verdict in the Hunter Biden trial. 2/3 of them, they approve of the verdict. No, at least 60% of Democrats approve of that verdict. What was the number of Republicans who approved of the Trump verdict? Do you remember?
15%. 15%.
So 60% of Democrats approve of that. 81% of Republicans approve of it. Not surprising. And like you said, only 15% of Republicans approve of the Trump verdict. So it's interesting because to put this in context, 85% of Democrats approve of the Trump verdict, and 60% of the Hunter Biden verdict. There is some partisanship going on there, obviously, 15, 20 points of it, maybe 25. But let's look at the other party. 81%, sure enough, they're there. They approve of the verdict on Hunter. This two-tier system, by the way, the two-tier corrupt justice system. And only 15%. So we're talking literally like a 65%, 70-point difference there. So you ask which party is looking at this through like completely partisan lenses, and none of them were going to vote. None of that 81, I think, percent that approved of the Hunter Biden verdict were ever going to vote for Joe Biden. So it's not going to make any difference at all. I just think that you look at that contrast, you look at which party has become who was the party that proclaimed itself the party of law and order, and look at just how far it's fallen to get these kind of numbers out there when you look at these two verdicts and look at the contrast with how one party is handling it, or not even party, because again, this is a family with Hunter Biden. By the way, they were all in there. Jill Biden was the first lady, was in court every day except one. And the only day she wasn't there was when she was in France, in Normandy. So, and you can't, I guess Eric was there a couple times for Trump, but it's like night and day, the difference between how both of these parties and defendants and their families have handled the situation.
Okay, Joe, we got to get to the Senate. So a bunch of new Senate polling. I know there's also been a bunch of new presidential polling, but latest has actually some pretty good numbers for Democrats pretty much across the board. You got Casey's up 5 in Pennsylvania, Rosen's up 2 in Nevada, Tammy Baldwin up 9 in Wisconsin, which I totally buy. Gallego's up 4 in Arizona, and I believe that's in a 3-way race. Other polls actually in a lot of other states are even wider. Joe, explain for our listeners why the Senate looks actually pretty decent right now in these battleground states, and how is it possible that they are actually overperforming Joe Biden that much? Like, how much of this is real?
Well, I think their numbers are real, and I think Joe Biden's numbers will be realer. In other words, I really still think that right now that, I mean, remember, these are state by state polls. So in that state, people are maybe much more focused or know more about that race, or have made decisions about, like, we know who like Carrie Lake is, and who, Kelly, who any of these candidates are that may be on the ballot this time around. Gallegos, for example. I mean, by this point, they know Bob Casey for sure in Pennsylvania. And so there's not as now. So I think those numbers are real. The numbers the reason I think Biden is lagging in these states, or lagging behind some of these candidates, is pretty simple. We keep talking about this every week, but we know the number of Republicans or undecideds or even Trump supporters said they might not vote for him if he's been convicted of crimes. We know that Biden isn't doing as well with core Democratic groups, Blacks, Latinos, younger voters, some of it tied to things like Gaza, which are legitimate reasons to protest and say, I'm not there yet. I'm not going to vote for you. I may not vote for you. I might. And I just think that that's created, we're in that weird zone right now where there's no cost to to not being for Biden right now. I mean, there's no price to pay. It's not the poll. You're not going into the voting booth. I think in the end, that contrast that I just talked about on the convictions, the contrast on climate change, the contrast on just the crazy, on banning contraceptives and other, and abortion bans and everything else that's going to be out, including some of these Republican Senate nominees. They're just off the scale nuts, is going to gel and start to solidify what we've seen in past. There has been very little ticket splitting between Senate and presidential candidates in the past few cycles. Very little. And so I think as we get closer, there won't be. You won't see a whole lot of ticket splitting, and Biden will gain ground here. But the big thing that we talked about for a long time about lagging indicators is the economic lag, and it's still very real. With the economy, good news everywhere you look. Inflation was basically zero in May. Gas prices are declining. Core inflation is at its lowest since 2021. And finally, food inflation has gone flat. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ are at record highs. We're in the middle of a startup boom again. Consumer confidence is up again. It drifted down a bit, but it's up again near a pre-COVID high. And so the more and by the way, that's just, again, going to start creeping into these numbers. So I think.
Well, and this, I wanted to skip around a little bit, but you look at how it creeps in. Do you think we're at a kind of a turning point with coverage on the economy? Is that too much to hope for? Because if you look at the headlines this week, actually, Joe, I know you mentioned this in the intro, they're not that bad. It
No,
was stuff
crime's
like,
down. Did you know
yeah,
that? Crime is down. They
yeah,
actually have
but that hurts
headlines that
Biden.
said crime was down. I know
But it
it's got to
probably
be
hurts
bad for Biden. Probably bad for him. Exactly. But no, I just think, and we've said this repeatedly on this pod, that the weight that's held Biden down is every day, every month gets less and less. And I think you're going to see those again. Who does he need to win? He needs to win back Democratic base voters. Again, like we were talking to Pollster a couple days ago, who talked about how young people they're big. The number one reason he felt there was, looking at the polling and the focus groups that he'd handled with young people, was their disappointment, and the reason they were looking at maybe Robert Kennedy or even Green was because of their disappointment in Biden on not doing enough on climate change. That it was their deep disappointment in Biden on climate change, and that when in the groups or on the poll, you actually didn't go negative on Trump and didn't go negative on RFK Jr., but just informed those younger voters of one or two or three accomplishments that positive things that Joe Biden had done to take on climate change. They immediately became supporters of Joe Biden. So we're not talking about you got to go nuke people to do this. There's clear messages that will get some of those young people back, get some of those core Democratic groups to gain, not all of them, but enough of them, while our former convicted felon on 34 counts, Donald Trump, president, is, I think, shrinking with some of his base, Nikki Haley supporters, the Republicans who said they wouldn't vote for a convicted felon, and more importantly, the 53% of undecideds in the battleground states who said they would not vote for a convicted felon. I think that group clearly is something that's going to hurt.
You're zooming out a little bit, which is a good time for us to get to a couple of, I think, kind of our more fun reader questions we've had in a while. This one's from Steven in LA. I'm not sure if that's Louisiana or Los Angeles. I'm betting Los Angeles. It seems like we're almost in a lull right now after the Trump verdict. You keep saying Joe Biden's momentum is growing. Do you see this election staying fairly steady, or is there room for a, quote, October surprise, unquote? Like, can anything really change the fundamentals at this point?
No, I think it's just going to keep moving in the direction that I just laid out. I mean, I said earlier that Trump only has a sledgehammer, and that the Biden campaign, he keeps pounding away, knocking crumbs off for the Biden campaign to follow. He's still doing it. The Trump sledgehammer continues. He has to do things like email his supporters with a subject line, "Haul out the guillotine," and shriek that they're in all caps, and shriek that they're all coming after you. This is so bad on so many levels for democracy, but also remember, this is not being additive. Again, this is a guy who, they were out there chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." He's still sending out emails with "Haul out the guillotine," like off with their heads, they're all coming after you, calling for revenge, persecuting his opponent. It's turning off independents. He can't help himself. It's certainly going to turn off Republican women who may be a little cross-pressured because of Dobbs' decisions. And yeah, they want tax cuts and fiscal, all that stuff. But this isn't helping. The Nikki Haley supports. How does "haul out the guillotine, they're all coming after you," calling for revenge, persecuting his opponent, help with any that's me? It is the sledgehammer bangs away to energize his base, and it just knocks off more crumbs for the rest of us in the pro-democracy coalition, including the Biden campaign. But there's plenty of us, who to go out and talk to these people and bring them over, because they're looking for a place to go, and it ain't Donald Trump. They're not going to vote for a guy who's been convicted on 34 felony counts and actually has a probation officer. Like, think about it. We're gonna make somebody president. He's got a probation officer, folks. Makes a lot of sense. Really does. I believe in second chances, but that's insane. Okay.
He's a little past chance number 2 at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, one more good one.
Sure.
From Cynthia in Cleveland. I'm excited to hear you talk more about states moving forward. Last election, I thought it was really helpful to hear from experts you don't get from the mainstream media. My question is, what election could you compare this to in recent years? An unpopular incumbent versus a less popular challenger. Has there ever been anything like this in your 40 plus years? I think she's asking you, not me.
Well, I've often compared it to in reverse of 1984. Probably the closest thing I can remember, sort of bring to bear. The unpopular incumbent, people still have a hard time buying this, but the unpopular incumbent was Ronald Reagan in 1982. But coming up to that election, only 37% of the American people said that they wanted Ronald Reagan to run for re-election. 37% sounds sort of familiar to what I don't know what the number is on Biden right now. Why? Because he was back then. Reagan was thought to be too old to run for a second term. His challenger, I worked for him, Vice President Walter Mondale, was in a dead heat with him late in 1983, late in the year. He was and John Glenn, another senator who was in competition for the Democratic nomination, was actually 7 points ahead of Reagan at that point. And again, Biden would be the incumbent this time. And what was driving that was inflation. Reagan had inherited really high inflation that kept rising in the first few months of his presidency. And as we got, 2-3 years in, people were still stung by the high prices. They weren't going down, all those kinds of things. But it's where I first saw that lagging economic thing. Actually, the economy had started turning well before people saw it or felt it. They kept complaining and complaining, even though, inflation was coming down and Reagan was out there and couldn't go anywhere. Well, Reaganomics was a disaster, a disastrous slogan, like Bidenomics was last year. It was a disastrous slogan until the last 6-7 months of that election. And 7-8 months later, it was morning in America in November, and Reagan went from basically a dead heat or behind to winning 49 states. I under no, first of all, different time. We're much more polarized. The media is different now and much more fragmented. There's actually a right-wing outrage machine. Just another bad fact that you probably won't want to hear. It was announced this morning, or I saw it, I tweeted about it, that it's now official. There are now more fake news sites in America than real ones. You are being inundated by false, misleading, misinformation of news sites that have been paid for. And by the way, the report also said that they were all being funded by dark money. So it makes you wonder why there's so many people in this country who believe that our economy is crap, there are no jobs to be found anywhere, and why we have destroyed our ability to create gas and oil and energy, when in fact the absolute opposite is true, producing more than ever, more jobs than ever been created in a 3-year period, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But my point is, because of that change in that economic lag, that's what propelled Reagan from dead man walking to morning in America. That's probably not going to happen on that kind of a scale, but this is the election. That's the election that I'm most reminded of over my career, where I've seen these kind of dynamics before. And then when you add in all the new dynamics that weren't there, like I said, the false information, the fragmented media, the fact that there's more fake news sites than real ones, and that the real ones have done such a horrible job of actually reporting what's happening, including that. I don't has anybody gone on the air and said, hey, there's more fake ones than us? But anyway, I still think that in the end, that's why I'm saying all these incremental movements that I see, undecideds moving away because of conviction, key Democratic base groups will start to come home, maybe not in record numbers, but in enough that I think in the end, I've said this before, I think Simon Rosenberg maybe one. I think he's more right than wrong about a lot of things. I don't disagree that in a one-on-one race, we might get to 53-47, 54-46 against Trump. The only thing that makes me shy away from some of his bigger predictions about how high Biden could go is the third parties. But I think even with the third parties, Trump is in a really bad place. And I think, everything is moving in the wrong direction for him.
Joe, I think that's a very good place for us to end today.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks, everyone, for listening to That Trippi Show. This podcast will always be free with support from our advertisers and is part of Resolute Square. So check out the latest at resolutesquare.com/Trippi. Please subscribe to That Trippi Show and leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. Also, if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. Always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question and a review on iTunes. And we actually got to a couple today. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Resolute Square.